restaurant was alive with its usual evening rhythm, the rhythmic clatter of cutlery, murmured conversations, the hum of soft jazz floating from hidden speakers. But none of that mattered when Elena's fingers slipped. It happened in a single trembling heartbeat. 1 second she was clearing the table, stacking plates with the tired precision of someone who had worked a double shift. The next, her hand brushed the chain around her neck, snagged on a loose thread, and the silver locket, her mother's last gift, fell. The metallic clink echoed far louder than it should have. The world didn't just pause, it seemed to inhale sharply, holding its breath with her. Elena's pulse jumped as she dropped to her knees to retrieve it. The locket lay opened on the polished marble floor, the tiny hinge so delicate it had always threatened to snap. But that was not the problem. The problem was that the private booth behind her had gone terrifyingly silent, and the man inside it, Lorenzo De Luca, was no ordinary customer. People whispered about him the way. Children whispered about ghosts. The appearance was always the same in every rumor. Cold eyes, colder decisions. A man whose name didn't just command loyalty, it commanded fear. And right now, those cold eyes were fixed on the small photograph revealed inside her fallen locket. Before she could reach it, his large hand moved faster. His fingers scooped the necklace from the floor with a gentleness that did not match the tension suddenly crackling through the air. Elena froze mid-reach, her breath strangled in her chest. She rose slowly as if any sudden move would trigger a disaster she couldn't predict. Lorenzo stared at the photograph with an expression that did not belong on the face of a Mafia boss. It wasn't anger. It wasn't cold calculation. It was disbelief. Then the disbelief crumbled into something raw, something human. His voice, always steady, dropped to a whisper so fragile it barely carried. "That's my brother." Elena blinked, her confusion sharp. "Excuse me?" He didn't look up. His thumb brushed over the tiny photo, tracing the outline of the little boy's smile. Elena had seen that photo every day of her life. She'd memorized every detail. The boy's bright eyes, his unruly dark curls, the way his grin lit up even the faded, time-worn picture. She had never imagined it could mean anything more than a story her mother kept locked behind silence. But the way Lorenzo stared at it, like the earth had opened beneath him, sent fear skittering down her spine. Finally, he lifted his gaze to her, and for the first time, Elena understood why people feared him. Not because he was loud or violent, but because he held emotions the way one held a loaded weapon. Tight, controlled, dangerous. "Where?" he asked, each word slow and deliberate. "Did you get this?" Elena swallowed, her throat dry. It was my mother's." His jaw tightened. A storm gathered in his eyes. "Your mother?" She nodded, trying not to step back. She couldn't show fear. People like him fed on fear. Or so she'd been told. "She gave it to me before she passed away. She told me it was important. She never explained why." Lorenzo exhaled a long, shaky breath. It didn't sound like anger this time. It sounded like grief, but grief like molten metal, blistering and barely contained. He motioned to the seat beside him. "Sit." The word wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a command in the traditional sense. But Elena sat anyway. Everyone did what Lorenzo De Luca said. Even fear listened to him. He placed the locket gently on the table between them, as though it were made of glass and memory. His hand hovered near it, but he didn't touch it again. Instead, he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Do you know his name?" he asked softly. Elena shook her head. "My mother never told me. She never told me anything about him. All she said was that he was someone she once cared about more than she could explain." Something in Lorenzo's face crumpled. It happened in a split second, but Elena caught it. A flash of pain so deep it didn't belong in the world of crime and power he ruled. "His name," Lorenzo said, voice cracking for the first time, "was Matteo De Luca." The world around Elena dimmed, the jazz faded, the clinking dishes became distant echoes. "De Luca," she repeated weakly. "As in, your family?" "My brother," he whispered. "My baby brother. He disappeared when he was 5. Elena felt her stomach twist painfully. "Disappeared? What do you mean, disappeared?" Lorenzo shifted forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze never leaving her face. We thought he was kidnapped. One moment he was playing in the courtyard, the next he was gone. The entire city searched, but nothing. No ransom, no clues, no body, just gone. His voice dropped, heavy with a sorrow that had clearly lived inside him for years. We never stopped looking, not for a single day. Elena's chest tightened. She didn't want to imagine what a family like his did when they lost someone, how far they would go, how many stones they overturned, how many enemies they destroyed. I don't understand, she whispered. What does this have to do with my mother? Lorenzo stared at her with a sudden sharpness, as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a waitress, but as a puzzle piece he had been missing for decades. I am saying, he replied slowly, that I need to know who your mother really was, and why she had a photo of my brother. The air around her thickened. Elena felt like something enormous and unseen had just shifted under her feet, tilting the ground. Her mother, Sophia, had always kept parts of her past hidden. Always avoided questions about where they came from, where they were going, why they moved so often. Elena had chalked it up to poverty, to escaping debts or heartbreak, to life being harder for some people than others. But now she wondered if those silences were hiding something far bigger. I don't know anything, she whispered. She never told me who he was. She never even said his name. Lorenzo leaned closer, his voice low but no longer dangerous. But you might know something she didn't realize you'd need. Anything. A place she avoided, a name she mentioned, a memory from when you were little. Elena felt a lump rise in her throat. She had very few memories of her early childhood. They were shadows more than images, blurred and out of reach. But there was one she had always wondered about. There was a story she used to tell me, Elena said slowly, when I couldn't sleep. She said she once saved a little boy, a boy with a smile so bright it made her believe the world still had good in it. Lorenzo's fingers curled into fists. She told me, Elena continued softly, that she wished she could have kept him forever, that he was the bravest little soul she had ever met. Lorenzo's breath faltered. That was him. His certainty shook her, but the next words he spoke shook her world. If your mother saved him, he said, voice trembling, then everything we believed was wrong. He leaned back, looking at the locket again. Which means my mother lost him. But your mother found him. Elena felt her heart crumble. Are you saying she rescued him? Lorenzo's eyes glistened with painful hope. I'm saying your mother may have been the only person who ever knew what really happened to Matteo. And for the first time in her life, Elena realized that the locket she had carried close to her heart for years wasn't just a keepsake. It was the key to a truth powerful enough to break a Mafia boss. A truth that had bound her life to his, long before she ever stepped into his restaurant. Elena sat in the leather chair opposite Lorenzo, feeling impossibly small in a room built for power. His office was dim except for the warm glow of the desk lamp and the soft halo of moonlight spilling through the tall windows. The shadows in the corners felt alive, heavy with secrets. The guards by the door stood like statues, their silence adding to the pressure weighing on her chest. But it was Lorenzo himself who made the air feel tight, as if every inhale risked shattering something fragile between them. He placed the locket in the center of the desk. The chain pooled like a silver tear. His hand hovered near it, trembling just enough for Elena to notice. That small tremor told her more about his pain than any words could have. Tell me everything you know about her, he said quietly. Everything. Elena clasped her hands to keep them from shaking. Her name was Sophia. She moved often. Never stayed in one place for long. We lived in small towns, sometimes for months, sometimes just weeks. She worked whatever jobs she could find. Waitressing, cleaning, sewing. She was never comfortable around strangers. She kept me close. Lorenzo nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to match the image in his mind with the stories he was hearing. Did she ever talk about her past before you were born? Elena shook her head. No. She was careful about what she told me. Sometimes I think she didn't want to remember. Other times I think she was protecting me from something. Or someone. Lorenzo murmured. The word hung between them, sharp and heavy. Elena swallowed. What exactly happened when your brother disappeared? Lorenzo leaned back, eyes drifting upward as if the ceiling held the answer he'd been chasing for 22 years. It was a Sunday morning. He was 5. My mother was busy preparing for a banquet. Matteo was playing with a ball in the courtyard. I was supposed to be watching him. His jaw clenched hard. But I was a child too, distracted, thinking about stupid things. I turned my back for maybe a minute, and when I looked again, he was gone. A quiet pain threaded through his voice, the kind of pain that never healed, only scarred deeper. The police searched everywhere, he continued. My father threatened half the city. Every rival family claimed innocence. Every ally swore loyalty. But there was no trace, no sighting, no demand, just nothing. Elena's heart ached at the image. A little boy lost in a world that could swallow him whole. We believed someone took him to hurt us, Lorenzo said. A message, a punishment. But now, he looked at the locket again. Now I wonder if someone took him to save him. Elena rubbed her palms together. My mother wasn't the kind of person who could ignore a child in danger. That may be exactly why Matteo ended up with her, Lorenzo said quietly. Elena tried to piece together her memories. Her mother's comforting warmth. The way she always pulled Elena close when she sensed danger. The nights she woke sweating, whispering, "We have to keep moving." Elena had always assumed they were running from poverty or maybe from a man who had hurt her mother. But now, maybe they were running from a past too tangled and dark to explain. "I remember something else," Elena said suddenly. "When I was 5 or 6, I asked her why we never settled down. She told me, some stories end safely only if no one knows the truth." Lorenzo exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. She was protecting someone, maybe both of you. Elena's eyes dampened. She loved that boy, whoever he was. He was Matteo, Lorenzo said firmly, as though the name alone could anchor the swirling uncertainty. He had those same curls, that same smile, and he trusted everyone. Too much. Elena smiled weakly. My mother said the boy she saved had a laugh that made the world feel lighter. Lorenzo's voice cracked. That was him. The door knocked twice, interrupting the heavy quiet. One of Lorenzo's guards stepped inside, holding a thin folder. His expression was unreadable, but the urgency in his stance made Elena sit straighter. Boss, the guard said, offering the file. We found late archived hospital records. From 22 years ago. Lorenzo took the folder with a hand that shook more openly now. He flipped it open, scanning the pages quickly. The more he read, the more his face drained of color. What is it? Elena whispered, her pulse racing. The guard shifted awkwardly. A woman named Sophia checked a young boy into a rural clinic. He matched Matteo's age and description. Dark curls, deep brown eyes, a healing bruise on the temple. The record says they were both exhausted and undernourished. Elena's breath hitched. Her heart felt like it was trying to escape her chest. But the guard wasn't finished. The notes say the boy had internal injuries. They tried to help him, but his voice softened. He didn't survive. He died 3 days later. Silence wasn't silence anymore. It was a shockwave that rolled through the room, swallowing every other sound. Lorenzo didn't blink, didn't breathe. The file slowly slipped from his hands, landing on the desk with a soft thud. His face contorted, not with anger, but with a grief so deep it hollowed him out. Elena felt tears spill down her cheeks. No, that can't. She never told me. She never said. She was protecting you, Lorenzo whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. Protecting herself. Protecting him from being dragged back into a world that failed him. Elena covered her mouth. She kept that grief alone all her life, and I never knew. Lorenzo nodded slowly. She wasn't hiding the truth to deceive you. She was carrying the burden, so you wouldn't have to. His eyes glistened, and before Elena could process it, tears slid down his face. Quiet, devastating tears. The kind that came from a wound decades old. Elena leaned forward, reaching for his trembling hand without thinking. And for the first time since she had met him, Lorenzo didn't feel intimidating or dangerous. He felt heartbreakingly human. She loved him, Elena whispered. Enough to make his last days gentle. Enough to keep his memory alive. Lorenzo squeezed her hand. She gave him what we couldn't. Neither spoke for a long time. The weight of the truth settled around them like ash. Sad, heavy, irreversible. When Lorenzo finally looked up again, something had changed in his eyes. Not the pain that would never leave, but there was clarity now, acceptance, and beneath it a gratitude so deep it softened the sharpest edges of his soul. "You didn't just bring me answers," he said quietly. "You brought me back to him. Even in death he wasn't alone. He had someone who cared." Elena nodded tearfully. "And now you know he wasn't lost, he wasn't forgotten." Lorenzo wiped his face with the back of his hand, the smallest of broken smiles forming. "No, he wasn't." In that moment, Elena realized that truth, even painful truth, was a kind of mercy. And though the revelation shattered the mystery, it also stitched something together between them, something that neither of them had expected. A story long buried had risen, and in its place, two lives that had walked separate paths for decades were slowly, painfully, beginning to intertwine. The night outside was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if the world itself had softened its voice out of respect for the truth they had uncovered. Elena sat beside Lorenzo in the back seat of the black sedan as it rolled down the empty road. Neither spoke, but silence didn't feel awkward. It felt heavy, necessary. The kind of silence that comes after a storm strong enough to change the shape of the land it crosses. Elena watched Lorenzo from the corner of her eye as he leaned his head back against the seat, the faint glow of passing streetlights brushing against his face. His expression was unreadable, but not in the cold way it had been earlier. Now it seemed fragile, contemplative. He looked like someone who had finally stopped running from a ghost he'd been chasing for 22 years, only to realize the ghost had been running with him all along. Eventually, the car slowed, turning onto a narrow, winding road lined with trees whose branches stretched overhead like protective arms. Lorenzo's men remained behind. He had dismissed them with a simple gesture. "Tonight," he had said quietly, "wasn't a night for guards. Tonight was personal." The cemetery came into view beneath the pale wash of moonlight. It was small, tucked away from the noise of the city, the kind of place forgotten by the world unless someone had reason to return. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as the car stopped. Elena stepped out first, the night air cool against her skin. She held the locket tightly in her hand, the chain wrapped around her fingers like a lifeline. Lorenzo joined her, closing the car door gently behind him, as if afraid to disturb the hush that hung over the graves. "This way," he murmured, though he had never been here before. His steps were slow, tentative, like he was walking into a memory he didn't know how to hold. Elena followed him down the narrow path. Dew glistened on the grass. An owl hooted in the distance. The world felt untouched and reverent, as if it understood the weight of the moment more than they did. They reached a small, weathered stone under a willow tree. Its drooping branches created a curtain of leaves, giving the grave a hidden, intimate space. The inscription was simple, worn, just a name and two dates. Matteo De Luca, a life that began and ended in the same year her mother had tried to build a future free from shadows. Lorenzo stood frozen. Elena watched as he slowly lowered himself to his knees. His fingers brushed the name carved into the stone, tracing each letter with aching care. The tough, unbreakable Mafia boss everyone whispered about looked suddenly very human, his shoulders slumping as if he'd been holding up the sky his whole life and had finally allowed it to settle. He didn't speak at first, didn't cry. He simply stared. Elena's throat tightened. She stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached up, covering her hand with his, grounding himself in the warmth of contact. "I spent years imagining him," Lorenzo said finally, his voice so soft she had to lean closer to hear. "I wondered if he was scared, if he was alone, if he cried for us." A tear slipped down his cheek, catching the moonlight. "But he wasn't alone. Your mother found him. She stayed with him. She gave him safety. She gave him love." Elena knelt beside him, her own eyes burning. "She loved him like he was her own," she whispered. "She told me once that some souls come into your life only briefly, but leave marks so deep they become part of who you are." Lorenzo closed his eyes, breathing shakily as if those words pierced something tender inside him. Elena placed the locket gently at the base of the grave. The metal glimmered softly, as if Matteo's spirit recognized it. I think, she said, she kept it close because she wanted him to be remembered, even if she couldn't tell anyone the truth. Lorenzo touched the locket, his fingers trembling. I hated myself for failing him, for looking away for those few seconds. His voice cracked, raw and unfiltered, but knowing he spent his last days with someone kind, someone who loved him, maybe I can breathe again. Elena leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. You didn't fail him, life did, circumstance did, but you never stopped searching, that matters. Lorenzo let out a long breath, fragile but cleansing, the kind of breath someone releases after carrying a weight too heavy for too long. You look like him, Elena murmured, surprising herself with the observation. He turned to her slightly. Do I? Yes, not in the face, but in the tenderness you try so hard to hide. She managed a small smile. It's the same softness in the eyes. He swallowed hard. I didn't think I had that left. You do, she whispered. For a few minutes they stayed like that in silence. The night wrapped around them gently as though sheltering the moment. Lorenzo finally straightened, wiping his eyes with a thumb. He reached for the locket again, but instead of taking it, he picked it up only to place it in Elena's hand. She frowned softly. It's yours. He shook his head. My mother hasn't seen Matteo in 22 years. She remembered him through pain. He curled her fingers around the locket. But you remembered him through love, that matters more. Elena felt a lump rise in her throat. I don't deserve. You do, Lorenzo interrupted quietly. You're part of his story now. And he's a part of yours. The wind rustled the willow branches, a soft shiver that felt almost like a child brushing past them. Lorenzo looked upward as if sensing the same whisper of presence. He let out a small hollow laugh. I think he'd like you. Elena blinked back tears. I think he'd be proud of you. Lorenzo turned to her fully, a faint breaking smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Thank you, he said, for coming with me, for not letting me face this alone. You weren't alone, she whispered. Not then, not now. Their eyes met in the dim moonlight, two souls bound together not by blood or fate, but by a truth they had unearthed side by side. Lorenzo stood and helped her to her feet, and as they walked away from the grave, Elena noticed something in his steps had changed. The heaviness was still there, but so was a fragile lightness, a weight lifted not completely, but enough to keep him moving. At the car, he paused and looked back at the willow tree, his expression soft. Goodbye, Matteo, he whispered. Rest now. They drove through the night, neither needing to speak. The darkness felt different now, not empty but peaceful, almost warm. Something had ended at that grave, but something else, small, delicate, unexpected, had begun between them. A quiet bond forged not from violence or fear, but from shared grief, shared truth, and a shared heartache that somehow brought them closer than either had ever allowed anyone to come. And as the city lights approached in the distance, Elena felt an unshakable certainty settle inside her. Their story wasn't ending. It was only just beginning.